راعي هذه الندوة وراعي هذا اللقاء، السادة ضيوف الروضة وأهل الروضة وأصدقاء الروضة، نرحب بكم جميعا، واسمحوا لي أن نرحب باسمكم بضيف لبنان وضيف طرابلس، ضيف الروضة رائد الفضاء والباحث والدكتور في نازا، في وكالة نازا، الذي ما زلنا نترقبه منذ أن نشر إعلان البلدية عن تنظيم هذا اللقاء، فليسمح لنا بأن نخبره بأننا مدرسة في أفق كل سماء صرنا نجوم الضياء. أترك الكلام الآن لزميلتي في التقديم السيدة سارة زين الدين، فلتتفضل.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It is not strange for NASA researcher and astronaut Donald Thomas to choose Lebanon as one of the countries he is visiting on his lecture tour. As the famous poem states, Lebanon is the nation of stars, and as Fairuz sang, it is the moon's neighbor. In cooperation with the municipality of Tripoli, it is an honor and a pleasure for Roضة الفيحاء Secondary School to welcome Donald Thomas on its campus and to host such an important scientific and academic seminar. Thank you.
يسعد لي هالمساء مليح اليمن معكم، مؤسس والمدير التنفيذي لبرنامج تنمية القادة الشباب يلي أطلقناه بلبنان، فرع لبنان، من يومين نهار الأربعاء بالأونسكو. كل واحد منكم هون موجود في معه هالبامفلت هيدي؟ مين ما معه البامفلت؟ عظيم. نحن بهالمناسبة بمناسبة إطلاق برنامج تنمية الشباب اللي بيهدف إلى تنمية الذكاء الشعوري والاجتماعي والإيجابي، في صفحة تشرح عن هالموضوع هيدا. نحن حبينا نعمل مبادرة ونعطي 1 year complimentary membership، يعني سنة membership يكون مجانية. لذلك إذا بتحبوا تكونوا members بالبرنامج، قبل يعني تملوا هالصفحة الأخيرة رقم 4 وتقدموها للإدارة، تحطوها بالإدارة، ونحن نستلمها من الإدارة ونتصل فيكم، لأنه رح يبلش البرنامج بلبنان إن شاء الله بأول سبتمبر بمخيم بالبقاع في دايرة عنايل، محمية دايرة عنايل، لتدريب عدد من القادة اللي رح يكونوا هن المسؤولين عن البرنامج في مدارسهم وجامعاتهم. شكرا، إن شاء الله تستفيدوا وتنبسطوا كثير بالسيمينار.
لن أطيل في التقديم وسأدعكم مع ما جئنا من أجله، مع الندوة المرتقبة. دكتور توماس، لو سمحت المنبر لك، تفضل.
I am so excited to be here tonight. I have flown in space on 4 space shuttle missions. I've spent 44 days in space, and during that time I went around the earth 692 times. So I passed over Lebanon on many of my orbits, and I always knew how beautiful your country is as seen from space. Your citizens, all of you, everywhere I've gone, are so warm and friendly and welcoming. I've been enjoying too much of your great Lebanese food, as you can see. And I also heard that the people up in Tripoli are the warmest, the friendliest, some of the nicest people in all of Lebanon. Is that true? I think so. I think this is this the last official scheduled event, Mr. Mully? We saved the best for last, right? And at my primary school, they brought all the students to the gymnasium. I sat on the floor. I watched a small black and white television that day of the launch. And as soon as the astronaut was in space, I said to myself, I want to do that. So ever since I was a little boy, I knew I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to take a rocket up to space. I wanted to experience zero gravity. And I wanted to see sunrises and sunsets with my own eyes from space. So I always knew what I wanted to do. So I knew it was going to be very difficult to become an astronaut. And I thought the only chance I would have of becoming an astronaut would involve me doing my best and working hard in school every single day. Has anybody by chance ever given you that advice? Work hard, do your best. Work hard, do your best. Have you ever heard that? You hear it all the time, don't you? From your teachers, your parents, your principals, your professors. Everybody tells you that advice, and it's really good advice because you never know when something you're learning today is going to help you in the future. Well, after high school, I went on to university. I got my bachelor's degree in physics, one of the sciences. And that's the minimum degree you need to become an astronaut. 4-year university degree in math, science, engineering, or the medical field. But again, I knew that competition was going to be very difficult, so I stayed in school and university, and I got my master's degree and my doctorate in engineering. So after nearly 10 years of university, I got out. I started working for a company called AT&T Bell Laboratories, and this was in the early 1980s, just about when NASA was starting to launch the space shuttles. So my timing was perfect on this. And NASA selects new astronauts every 3 or 4 years. They'll pick a small group of 10, 15, or 20 astronauts, depending on their needs. And it was 2 years after I got out of university, NASA made an announcement that they were looking for new astronauts. I was all excited. I wrote to NASA. I got the application form. I filled it out, and I mailed it back into them. And guess what happened? They said, no thanks. They didn't want me. And I was surprised as well, but I didn't give up, and I decided I'll try again. 2 years later, there was another astronaut selection, so I got another application. I filled it out and sent it in, and guess what happened that time? They said, no thanks. At this point, I felt like my grandmother and I had the same chance of becoming an astronaut. 3 years later, there was another astronaut selection. I sent my application in, and this time NASA called me up, and they invited me to Houston, Texas, to the Johnson Space Center for a week of medical tests and an interview. And out of the thousands of people that apply to be an astronaut, NASA will select 100 of those people. They bring them to Houston, Texas, and you spend a full week on a very thorough medical exam. And then there's a 1-hour interview. I passed all the medical tests. I went on to the interview. That went very well. And at the end of the week, I went back to my job and just sat there and waited to see, did I make it or not? And I was back at my job about a week when some of my friends started calling me up from across the United States. And they called me and they said, hey, Don, the police have been calling about you. And let me tell you, if the police are ever calling about you, and when I heard that NASA was doing this, I thought this is a great sign. I didn't think NASA could do this on all 100 people they had interviewed, and I thought they must have selected their astronauts, and this is the final security check to make sure you're good to go before they announce the names. So I was all excited, and it was about a month later I got the telephone call from NASA. And this time they said, Don, thank you very much for applying. We had a lot of good candidates. We didn't select you, but good luck in the future. And I hung up that phone, and I was in shock. I thought I had made it in that time, but here for the third time, they said no. First time was no. Second time, no. Third time, they interviewed me, and they got to know me, but the result was still no. And I decided at this point, I need to give up on this silly dream of mine. You know, I gave it my best effort. I worked hard. I really did my best, and I tried 3 times. But I realized it's time to forget this silly dream and to move on and to do something else. The next morning, and the very first thought that popped into my head was, I still want to be an astronaut. So I asked myself, thank you. I asked myself, is there any more of these little things that I can do to improve my background, to make myself a better candidate? And again, by studying the data, who NASA selected, who they didn't select, most of the astronauts that NASA was selecting were already working at one of the NASA centers. And most of them were working at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. So when I realized that, I went in to my boss. I told him I was going to quit my job. I got in the car. I drove halfway across the United States to Houston, Texas, and I got a job as an engineer working on the space shuttle program. I did that for 3 years, and then there was another astronaut selection. This is number 4. You can quote me on this. I said, habita, 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 habita. I finally got the words yes out of my mouth, and then I hung up the phone, and I was jumping up and down, yelling and screaming for 10 minutes because I knew I made it into the program. I knew I would be going into space. I didn't know when it would be. It could be 5 years or 10 years. I didn't know when I would be on my first mission, but I knew I was in the line, in the queue to go into space. I was 35 years old when I got that phone call, and I started a 4-year training program for my first mission. So the first time I made it to space, I was 39 years old. 39 years old is pretty much an old man, right? No? This is why I love Lebanon so much. When I asked that question in the United States, when I asked that question, same question in the United States, I say 39 is an old man, everybody agrees with me. They say, oh yeah, that's way old. But here in Lebanon, you're so polite and kind. But some of the careers our young students will pick, it will take time to get there. So I just want to encourage you to be patient, give it time. You probably don't recognize that guy on the far right-hand side, but that's the way I used to look 20 years ago, before glasses, gray hair, wrinkles, and a few kilograms around the middle here. And this is all from eating your great Lebanese food the last 12 days. I want to tell you that. And as I stood there gazing up at it, I had amazing butterflies in my stomach. You ever get butterflies? Maybe before some test or big exam or some other event in your life, you may get a little nervous. And that's the way I felt. I was a little bit nervous, a little bit scared, but mainly really excited because I knew in 12 hours I was going to be sitting inside the space shuttle blasting off. And I almost couldn't believe where I was and what I was about to do. Before I climb on board, these 2 gentlemen in the white suits will help me put on a parachute. We'll get the helmet on, the gloves on. Once we're all set, I get on my hands and knees and crawl inside, and they help strap me into my seat. We're laying on our backs for launch. We've got shoulder harnesses and a seat belt on, so they strap us in good and tight because there's a lot of shaking and vibration during liftoff. You don't want to bounce out of your seat and hurt yourself or damage equipment, so they get us strapped in good and tight. Once we're all ready, they close and seal that round hatch, and then everybody moves away from us about 5 kilometers away. And it's very quiet for us inside the shuttle up until 6 seconds before liftoff. At that point, the 3 engines at the tail of the shuttle start coming up to full power. We're still physically bolted down to the launch pad at that point. Once the computers say those 3 engines look good, then we light these big white solid rocket boosters. And the instant they light, immediately you take off. And laying on my back in my seat, I could hear the roar of the engines. I could feel the shaking and vibration. And right at liftoff, it felt to me as if somebody had their hand in the middle of my back and that they were just pushing me up into the sky. And that's what the shuttle is doing, literally pushing us, tossing us up in the air. This picture is taken 4 seconds after liftoff. We're going 200 kilometers an hour already. So we don't ease off the launch pad. It's literally boom, and you accelerate faster and faster every second. This is taken from a NASA plane a few kilometers away. You see we launch right along the coastline of Florida. That's all the Atlantic Ocean there. The shuttle is smaller than the red dot on the laser pointer. You can barely see it. But you can see the bright flame there from our engines. That's about 500 meters long. 2 minutes into the flight, we are 40 kilometers up in the air. And after 2 minutes, we're traveling at a speed of about 4,000 kilometers an hour. And those 2 side rockets have used their fuel. They separate and fall back to Earth. We recover those and clean them up and use them again on another mission. So at this point, we have our space shuttle right here. Those 3 dots are our 3 engines that are burning. This little fuzzy patch is our big fuel tank, and that's going to take us the rest of the way to space. And that would leave us then with the space shuttle orbiting the Earth. It only takes 8.5 minutes to get to space. That was always amazing to me. I bet it took most of you more than 8.5 minutes to get here tonight, right? And to think about that, in that same period of time, you could be 300 kilometers above the Earth, and at this point we're traveling at a speed of 27,000 kilometers an hour. 27,000 kilometers an hour is like 7 kilometers a second. So imagine getting from here to Beirut in 10 seconds. Here's our pilot, Susan, and she's typing on a laptop computer right there. And I want to point out one feature. If you look over here, you'll see she's got her toes hooked on that vertical gold pole. If she didn't do that, every time she would hit the keyboard on the computer, what do you think would happen? She would go flying up in the opposite direction. But if she just anchors her toes a little bit, she can stay in position and type on the computer all day long, just floating in the air. So space is a really fun, comfortable environment to be in. And in space, there's no up or down. I think we pretty much agree which way is up and which way is down here this evening. But in space, there is no up or down. And you know here on Earth, if you stand on your head, all the blood rushes to your head because of gravity. Have you ever felt the pressure from that? Well, in space, that doesn't happen. You go upside down, and you feel totally normal. And in space, wherever your head is pointed, that direction is up for you. Wherever your feet are pointed, that's down. So this is Nancy and Kevin from my second flight, and Nancy's looking at Kevin saying, "Hey, Kevin, you're upside down." Well, he's looking right back at her saying, "No, you're upside down." In his little world there, she's the one that appears to be upside down. Now in space, we don't have a refrigerator or freezer, so all of our food is freeze-dried. And they come in small plastic packages like I'm holding here. And to prepare a meal, we bring it over to this food station. There's a needle that'll poke inside that package. We can inject hot water. This dry, hard food will absorb that water, soften up, and after 3 or 4 minutes, it's ready to eat. We just cut this open with a pair of scissors and then eat it with a normal fork or spoon. All the food has a little dot of Velcro on it, and after we make our meal, we could just Velcro it to ourselves. You can float to a window, and you watch the Earth go by, and you have your lunch or dinner right there. If I had this bottle of water in space, I could take the top off, tip it upside down to get a drink, and nothing would happen. Without gravity, that liquid's not going to fall or pour out of the bottle. So we can't drink out of a glass or bottle, and instead, in space, we drink out of little foil pouches like you see here. This is a bag of powdered orange juice. We've got powdered lemonade, powdered coffee, powdered tea. And to prepare the drink, we bring it to that food station. The needle pokes in there. We can inject the water. You just mix it up a little bit with your fingers. You poke a straw in there and squeeze it in your mouth. Does that remind you of anything that might be in your lunch some days? So we don't use our muscles at all in space, and it's very important to exercise. So we had this bicycle we'd ride every day for about 45 minutes. We get your heart muscle going, get your leg muscles working, so that when we come back to Earth at the end of the mission, we're still in good shape. Some of the astronauts used to make a big deal about it. They would say, "I want to bicycle across the Pacific Ocean." If you ever hear that claim, don't be too impressed. It only takes about 15 minutes. Sleeping is a little different in space. The inside of the space shuttle is fairly small, maybe the size of your kitchen at home, and we don't have dedicated bedrooms. So when it was time to go to bed, we would take a sleeping bag and attach it to the wall with a couple of clips. Then you just float up there, slip inside, zip it up, and you go to bed. We wear the dark eye shades that you see here because we go around the Earth every hour and a half. And you get 45 minutes of daylight, 45 minutes of nighttime. If you don't want the sun coming in your eyes all the time, you need to wear the eye shades. And finally, you see how our astronaut has his arms crossed like this? Here on Earth with gravity, if I totally relax, my arms are going to fall to my side. But in space, if you totally relax, the natural position of the body is a little hunched over, and the arms tend to come up and float right here. So can you imagine you wake up in the morning, you open your eyes, and the first thing you see are two hands floating in front of your face? Our astronauts are not that brave, so we tuck our arms in like you see here. And the real reason we do it, there's a lot of cables and switches off to the side. You don't want your arm in the middle of the night floating over there, bumping a cable, hitting a switch, doing some damage. So we just try to get nice and snug, as you see here. So this toilet is like a portable toilet, or porta potty we call them, that you might see at a construction site. And in the bowl part of the toilet down here, we have giant fans. And to go to the bathroom, there's a little white knob to the side. You push that forward, that activates the fans, and it sucks air from the toilet seat downward. So we use that down rush of air to act like gravity to keep all the waste material down. I've got a map in my hand here. I'm trying to figure out where we are around planet Earth. And I'm looking out a window here towards the tail end of the shuttle. And I took a camera right up to the window, I pressed it against the glass, and I took a picture so you can see exactly what my eyes are seeing. And this is the view I get to see out the back. So that's the beautiful Earth from 300 kilometers up. All the blue in this image you see here is the Pacific Ocean. The white area are clouds. And typically these clouds are 5 or 6 kilometers above the Earth. And again, we're flying 300 kilometers up. We're well above the atmosphere. Over here is Baja California, part of Mexico. And if you look really carefully here, you may see a little thin blue line on the bottom edge of the Earth. I don't know if you can see that where you're sitting. Any idea what that might be? It's the ozone layer is part of it. What else? It's the atmosphere. Yeah, exactly right. Who said that? We got a smart guy over there. So that's our atmosphere. On a nice sunny day like we had today in Tripoli, you look up at that blue sky, it looks like it goes on forever and ever. From space, we see the atmosphere edge on. And it looks, just as you see in this picture, as a paper-thin layer. You know, most of the air that protects us here on planet Earth is in that first 30 kilometers. That's it. And that's why when we pollute the air, it can have such a major impact on our planet. And here you see the Himalaya mountains. And right here at the center, this is Mount Everest. And right there is the very top of Mount Everest. Now, I can stand up here in front of you and tell you without lying, I have seen the top of Mount Everest with my own eyes about 25 times during my missions. I sense you're not impressed by this. I call it the lazy man's way to see the top of Mount Everest, right? No climbing involved, just drinking my juice as we cruise overhead at 27,000 kilometers an hour. But I use this picture to illustrate some of the things I got to see and do during my career. And again, the impression you have when you watch a sunrise from space, you see how thin our atmosphere is. That red, orange, blue layer you see here is only about 30 kilometers thick. Anybody recognize this beautiful part of the world? It's beautiful Lebanon. Didn't I tell you it was beautiful from space? Yeah. Let's put a few cities in here for you. So here's Beirut. Here's Byblos. The beautiful, beautiful city of Tripoli. Right, Mayor? Yeah. And you see the Bekaa Valley through here. And here is the beautiful city of Tripoli. And we're so honored to have our mayor here tonight. I'm really thankful to have you here tonight. And your city, like I said, is even more beautiful up in person when I get to meet the great people here than when you see it from space. And you see how beautiful it is here. Okay, at the end of the mission, it's time for us to come home. We would fire 2 engines from the tail of the shuttle. It would slow our speed down from 27,000 kilometers an hour to 26,000 kilometers an hour. And it sounds like we're still going fast, but at that speed, gravity takes over and we begin our fall back to Earth. And it takes us about 50 minutes before we come down and land at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. We land just like an airplane and roll down the runway. We put our brakes on, and then we just sit and wait for them to open the hatch. And it takes them about an hour. Hold on, my last slide, it's not going. It takes us about an hour before they open the hatch. And when you first come back from space, you feel like you weigh about 1,000 kilograms because you've been floating around weightless for 2 weeks, and then suddenly you come back to this polar gravity. Just a normal pull we feel in here today, but I felt so heavy. My arms were heavy, my legs were heavy. I was a little dizzy when I got back, and it took about a day or so for that dizziness to go away, and maybe a week or so to get your muscle strength back, and then you're pretty much back to normal. And this picture was taken 2 hours after I landed on my very first mission. That's me here on the left. And after we took this picture, I remember I turned around and I looked up at the word Columbia, and I was just staring at my space shuttle. And I thought, what an amazing vehicle this is. You know, this was my house in space for 2 weeks. This thing protected me from that fiery re-entry coming in through the atmosphere. And then one of the next thoughts that popped into my head was, I got to do this again. And as soon as I landed on my first flight, I knew I wanted to go up in space and do it again. And I went up on a total of 4 missions then aboard the space shuttle. So that's a little bit about living and working in space. The most important thing that I passed along to you tonight that I want you to remember is to never give up on your dreams. It doesn't matter what your dream is, how big, how small. Keep working hard for that. Keep it inside, and you can accomplish, like I said, anything you want to in your lifetimes. So I thank you all very much. It's been a great opportunity for me.
الدرع الأولى التكريمية من بلدية طرابلس يسلمها رئيس البلدية الأستاذ أحمد قمر الدين. وطبعا الدرع التكريمية الثانية من ثانوية روضة الفيحاء يسلمها المدير العام الأستاذ مصطفى المرعبي. في الختام نشكركم جميعا على حضوركم على أمل أن يتجدد لقاؤنا بكم في مناسبات لاحقة.
To my students and my people that leaders dream and they make their dreams come true. And we enjoyed the presentation a lot. And we were very honored to meet you. Thank you again. Thanks.
لا تقف هون يلا بس بليز ربط التليفون شوي.